Bluish ghost girl in an old-style nightgown. My parents' house is 7 miles from the Manassas battlefield from the Civil War. I don't know if that's important, but there are a lot of urban legends about how spooky of an area it is. When I was in maybe 4th grade, one woke up and saw an outline of a bluish teenage girl in an old-style nightgown. She was at the foot of my bed looking at me. I blinked and she was gone. I figured it was just a dream until years later when I was in high school my younger sister came to me and said, "I want to tell you something but you have to promise not to laugh." She proceeded to tell me that when she was walking down to the basement the night before she thinks she saw a teenage girl in a nightgown. When she blinked the girl was gone. I told her my story and we were just like, okay, feelings validated, but fuck. Fast forward to when my sister and I were both in college, we were visiting home for Christmas and my dad drunkenly told us about the time he saw a teenage girl in an old-style nightgown looking at the Christmas tree years before. All of us only saw her one time and haven't experienced anything else. Owner of old house dies after renovation. In my current house that we bought from family friends. They lived on several acres and once he found out he had cancer and it got to the point that he just couldn't keep up the maintenance, he asked us if we wanted it. Coming from a family that has always owned land, it was an easy choice. The kicker was the house needed a ton of work. I had to take a month and every weekend off just to get the house right. I had been 2 months into working on the house and we were just about done with everything. Late one night all the power went out and a huge flash of light lit up all the windows. I thought a power line had been struck, so I looked out all the windows to check. Not seeing anything, I got my flashlight and walked out to the transformer in the backyard. This was last fall, so we had frost starting to cover the ground. I could hear my footsteps on the ground. I looked out into my back field and saw 3 figures walking away from the house. I couldn't hear their footfalls. 2 disappeared suddenly and 1 kinda stayed for a few extra seconds. It seemed to stand there and look back at the house, then it too disappeared. I got back in the house and that's when my wife told me Tom had passed. I like to think that was him who stayed back just a few extra minutes to see what the house looked like. He was unable to come to the house to see everything we had done and only got second-hand visuals from his wife and us when we visited. They had lived in the home for 44 years. So Tom, I hope you approve and you're welcome to come see what it looks like now that it's done. Antique music box causes chaos. My friend had a roommate that collects antiques. Her roommate bought an old music box from a second-hand store, and there was definitely something attached to it. My friend's roommate started getting sleep paralysis almost every single night, and my friend kept waking up with scratches on her face and body. I was in her room one day, about a week after all this stuff had started, and I watched multiple things get flung off of their bookcase. It wasn't like the items just fell. Each item had an arc to it as it fell, like something smacked the items or pushed them off. When we got closer to the bookcase, we realized everything that had been flung off the shelf had been on the same shelf as that damn music box. Every other shelf was untouched. We returned the music box the next day. Humanoid creature with an elongated head but no face. About a year ago, I was out back with my family. It was around 8 and the sun was setting. We lived in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, the closest neighbor was far away. Something down the field kept catching my eye but I ignored it at first. My sister saw it too and kept looking out towards the trees. She was getting freaked out about it. My mom said to go investigate, so me and my sister started to walk across the field towards the tree line. Big mistake. It's hard for me to describe. This was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. I didn't see it at first, and I didn't understand why my sister was so scared. Until we were about 100 yards away. When I saw this creature. Tall, probably 8 or 9 feet tall, white, humanoid with an elongated head. And no face. It had long arms and peeked around the trees. We stopped in our tracks. We couldn't tell what it was. It took a few steps further out of the trees and swayed back and forth at me like a praying mantis. Me and my sister ran screaming back to the house, where my mom stood, jaw dropped. She saw it too. I had never been so scared in my life. We grabbed the binoculars and watched this terrifying creature peek in and out of the tree line, spying on us. My grandma thought we all had a wild imagination. The sun was almost gone now and it was getting really dark, and the darker it got, the more it moved back and forth along the trees. It was terrifying, so we went in for the night and locked everything up tight. I couldn't sleep that night. I was hearing scratching on the roof, and at one point, a very loud bang and various noises coming from the barn. I was very afraid that I would wake up to my animals missing. The next morning my grandma asked if we heard the loud bang outside that night. She ended up taking my grandpa with her on her morning walk. I have no idea what it was and it haunts me to this day. UFO sightings. So last summer my band went on a West Coast tour and we had a show in Roswell. I was mad excited because I'd been wanting to visit Roswell since I was little and checking out the same UFO book from the school library over and over. Anyways, we explore the city and play the show and it was a great experience. We had a long drive to Tucson to pick up a friend from the airport, so we decided to drive overnight as it would be easiest to make it there on time. I know it seems awfully convenient that something would happen in Roswell, and I had that in mind, because it would seem too easy to make up the story, but something happened about 45 minutes outside of Roswell once we started our overnight drive. I'm riding shotgun as our drummer is driving first shift. We are on these winding back road highways that are awesome and give us an immaculate view of the stars. So yeah, roughly 45 minutes away from Roswell, we are coming up to this bend in the highway and to the left of the van, we see a light. It appears to be a light on a barn as we assumed it was from someone's property in the woods, but that assumption quickly changed when the light started moving and keeping pace with the van. This bend was going to the right, so we weren't circling a light in the woods and there wasn't an access road, so it wasn't coming from a car. This light was just steadily keeping pace with us at about 75 miles per hour and weaving in and out of the tree line. Sometimes it would move behind the trees and then it would just dart out from the trees, still effortlessly matching our speed. The light wasn't all that bright, or so it didn't shine a lot of light. I don't know how to explain it, but it was this bright ball of light that was roughly the size of an exercise ball. It seemed really bright, but it didn't really light up anything around it. Even when it got about 15 feet from the left side of the van, it was just there. At this point, our drummer and I are yelling, "What the fuck is that? Do you see this shit?" And then after about 30 seconds of following us, it stops dead in its tracks, about 10 feet off the ground, on the side of the road. No slowing down. Just as if it hit a wall and immediately was stopped in its tracks. We just kept driving, bewildered, and looked at it in the rear view mirror until the road took it out of view. Still no logical explanation as we talked for hours on what it could have been. Maybe there is one, but we couldn't figure it out. Still crazy to think about. We contact evil spirit and it showed up. I suppose this falls under the ghost category, but I'm not entirely sure what it was. In my mid-teens I would stay home during the summer, often by myself, while I was working and my parents camped at a national park as campground hosts. Pretty sweet as a kid, parents show up every couple weeks to buy food, do laundry, then we're off again. My cousin, who was my same age, would come and hang out and watch movies with me, play video games, all that stuff. We were interested in the paranormal, and he claimed to know a guy who talked to demons or spirits and was dabbling in dark things. I wasn't sure I bought all of that, but it was a fun discussion nonetheless. At the end of an evening having these conversations about things we had personally experienced or things our family members had related to us, I drove him home. As I drive him home the discussion goes more to the dark spirits or demons avenue, and how he was interested in seeing if it was real and what he could do with that kind of contact. I don't remember the specifics of the whole conversation, but as I pull up to his house, which was on a corner with a streetlight on his corner property, and am counseling him to maybe rethink this, I look up into the rearview mirror and see something I won't forget. A tall shadow, directly beneath the streetlight, no discernible features whatsoever, just pitch black, with what looked like a hat on. I snap around quickly to see this shadow without the mirror and, naturally, it's gone. No hint of where it went, and if it had been a person there was enough open ground surrounding the area that I wouldn't have missed it retreating in any direction. I tell my cousin that we are not speaking about this further, that he should go inside, light a candle and say prayers, meditate, or whatever worked for him, because something was listening. Encountered the man with the wide brim hat shadow. I had an encounter with him one night in Georgia. I was maybe 22 and my little brother and I were renting a house in a pretty bad neighborhood in Athens. The house should have been condemned. Really old and no AC with spiders living in the AC ducts, but we were both broke and so it was all we could afford at the time. Our landlord was extremely shady and we would randomly come home to find him inside the house. Well, it was summertime in Georgia, so having no AC was a death sentence, so we bought 2 window unit ACs and both slept in the living room on air mattresses so we would only have to air condition one room. We were both sleeping in the living room when I woke up at around 3:30 a.m. and happened to look towards my feet. There at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the streetlights coming through the blinds of the huge living room window, was a tall, thin man in a suit and wide brim hat. I couldn't make out his face as it was all in shadow, but I could see he was smiling and his eyes were glowing with a pale blue light. I said, "Nope," and rolled over to look away from what I was sure was a ghost, and he was instantly next to me, directly in my face, and had this wide toothy grin on his face. I jumped back and yelled for my brother to wake up. "There's a ghost in our house," and he just kind of rolled over and told me to go back to bed. I look back and the hat man is gone. I sat outside on the front stoop the rest of the night smoking. We moved out maybe a month later and I never saw him again after that night. Not yet anyway, but I am always worried he'll come back. Living with a ghost. On my dad's side of the family, we have this ghost spirit that kinda just sits around. Only on my dad's side, and we've named him Timmy. Back when I was 8, it was 3 days before Christmas and I was watching Looney Tunes at 3 a.m. for whatever reason. I heard a sound, so I looked up towards the ceiling, and when I did, a chuck on Lego bricks came flying at me, seemingly from nowhere. It wasn't my brother messing with me because he was sound asleep beside me. I explained this to my parents and my dad says that he sees him sometimes too. I called my grandmother, Dad's mom, and she explains who Timmy is and how only this side of the family has encounters with him. Very strange but cool in a way. By the way, the Legos weren't thrown aggressively, just enough to know that something was there. Strange white dog. About 3 years ago, me, my sister, and a cousin were driving back home from the movie theater when we encountered a really strange occurrence. I can't explain the feeling I get, but when I think about it, I get tears in my eyes and feel that fear that spread all through my body when it happened all over again. Basically, I was in the backseat and my sister was driving. We were on a back road in a very rural county in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, and we were about 5 minutes from my house. The stretch of road we were on was completely straight and was surrounded by thick woods. It was pitch black, so you could only see about 100 feet in front of the car. So we were driving, and all of a sudden, about 100 or so feet ahead of us and over a little hill in the road, we saw a large white thing walking across the road in an upright position. In a really weird fashion, it hit us all as absolutely terrifying. With no thought at all, we all started screaming. We drove up on it, and it was no longer standing up. In fact, it was a large white dog. And it just sat down. Right in the middle of the road. I don't know what kind of dog does that. We were all terrified, so my sister drove off the road around it. We kept driving, talking about how scary and off that was, when the craziest thing happened. This is what really scares me to this day. About half a mile up the road, the exact same dog comes walking back into the road. And no kidding, he sat down in front of our car. You can only imagine how terrifying that was. To this day it scares me to death just to think about. I have another story of an odd creature I saw back in that county, but I'll save it for another day. Needless to say, I don't live there anymore.